Nick Whalen here from RotoWire, going to give you some sneaky ads at every position to make in your fantasy leagues ahead of Week 10. Talk quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends, receivers, you name it. We'll give you everything you need to know this week. We'll start as we do each week at the quarterback position. And you know the drill here, right? In just a 1 QB league, a lot of these players shouldn't necessarily be rostered, but if you're playing in Superflex, if you're looking ahead to who you might have on bye, you just want to add a little bit of depth, here are some guys to consider. Justin Herbert of the LA Chargers, not exactly a sneaky ad, but only rostered in about 40% of ESPN leagues. If you look at the last month or so, the Chargers are starting to throw the ball a bit more. We're starting to see an identity change for this Chargers team. 34, 39, 32, 27 pass attempts for Justin Herbert in the last 4 games. He did not attempt more than 27 passes in any of the first 4 games of the year when the Chargers were running the ball more effectively. You look ahead at the schedule, the Chargers get Tennessee, Cincy, Baltimore, and Atlanta in their next 4 games, all pretty appealing fantasy matchups from an opposing pass defense perspective. So if you're cycling through backup quarterbacks, if you're looking for that secondary guy, Justin Herbert, somebody I'd be comfortable throwing out there in a bye week scenario. For the second straight week, we got to talk about Russell Wilson. Still very low rostered in ESPN leagues. Steelers obviously coming off of a bye, so that's part of the reason for that. But, I got to give credit where credit's due. I'm not a Russell Wilson guy, but he looked great against the Jets. He looked great against the Giants. Jets was the much bigger fantasy game, but actually threw for more yards in that Giants game, his second start. He's done exactly what he's been asked to do so far, which is liven up this Pittsburgh passing game, create more opportunities downfield, get George Pickens more involved. You look at the schedule coming up for Pittsburgh. They got Washington and Baltimore the next 2 weeks. 2 very good teams in real life, but 2 good fantasy defenses to go up against. Washington, 24th in pass defense EPA. The Baltimore Ravens, 31st. One more quarterback to keep an eye on, Drake Maye of the New England Patriots. Going to keep mentioning Drake Maye here just about every week, most likely. He's still only 10% rostered in ESPN leagues. I know it's the Pats. I know he's a rookie. The upside's fairly limited. But if you need a second quarterback in Superflex, you could do a lot worse than Drake Maye. 4 teams on bye this week, 4 teams on bye next week, 6 teams on bye in week 12. So you got to start looking ahead. Maye's thrown for at least 200 yards in all 3 starts that he's finished this season. Not a lot of touchdown potential necessarily, but we did see him use his legs effectively these last couple of weeks. 8 carries for 95 yards in week 9 against Tennessee. Also had 46 rushing yards early in that Jets game before exiting with a concussion. The upcoming matchups aren't fantastic for New England, but none of them really are when you're the Patriots. And again, the bye week's coming up. Drake Maye could be a reasonable fill-in in 2 quarterback leagues. Let's move to the running back position where the landscape is pretty dry for the second consecutive week. We'll start with Ray Davis in Buffalo. Only played 9 snaps this past week against Miami. Obviously, James Cook, the clear number 1 there. We saw a decent amount of Ty Johnson as well. But Davis is more enticing to me than Ty Johnson. If I'm looking at those 2 backups, he scored on a long touchdown catch and run in the Miami game, and he did carry the ball or was targeted on 6 of his 9 snaps. So even though he's not playing that much, he does tend to see the ball when he's on the field. Over the last 3 games, Davis has only carried 15 times with James Cook back in the mix, but there's still some handcuff value here, especially in this high-scoring Buffalo offense. Probably not starting him really in any situation unless James Cook were to be out, but if we get to that scenario, then I want Ray Davis on my bench. A couple of names to keep an eye on with the Arizona Cardinals, Trey Benson and Emari Demercado. Now, it was Demercado who had the long touchdown run just before halftime against the Bears. I have no idea what Chicago was doing defensively on that play, but nevertheless, if I'm targeting one of the 2, even with that, it would still be Trey Benson. He played 16 snaps in the Chicago game, carried 8 times, was targeted once on those 16 snaps. Certainly not somebody you're comfortable starting right now by any means, but if you're making a speculative ad, if you're cycling through some options in your running back room, I don't mind Trey Benson as a handcuff for James Conner, just as Ray Davis is for James Cook. Conner has been healthy this season, and so far hasn't missed any time. When he's healthy, he's going to be the guy. But we have to keep in mind his track record. He's missed at least 4 games in 3 of the last 4 seasons. He's really been banged up just about every year. So if that injury comes, I think Trey Benson would be the guy to have on your bench waiting in the wings. Next up, Justice Hill. I feel like I mention him here every week. Still somewhat of a desperation play, but at least he'll be involved every week. The question is, to what degree will Justice Hill be involved? I'm going to be frank here. He's entirely receiving dependent. Don't touch him in non-PPR leagues, even half PPR, not very appealing. He has not scored a rushing touchdown on the year, but he does have a pair of receiving touchdowns. He had 3 catches for 43 yards last week against Denver, had a couple of 6-catch games earlier in the season. It really is game flow dependent. It's game plan dependent. It's been tough to predict, when those Justice Hill games may come. Obviously, he's playing well behind Derrick Henry, but he's a name to monitor. He's available in about 80% of ESPN leagues, just looking for a piece of that Baltimore offense. One more running back to mention, Emanuel Wilson in Green Bay. Saw him get into the end zone in that sloppy game against Detroit on Sunday. Now, Josh Jacobs is going to be the volume guy as long as he's healthy. We know that, but both Wilson and Chris Brooks have been involved in the last couple of weeks. Brooks, more of a passing down guy. Wilson, more of a true backup running back in every sense of the word. Green Bay is heading into a week 10 bye, so keep that in mind. Can't use either of those guys this week, but those are just two names to monitor in deeper leagues, or again, if you're cycling through bench options, trying to find something there. And if Josh Jacobs were to go down, I think Emanuel Wilson would be the back to own in Green Bay. Before we get to our next sneaky ads at receiver and tight end, please give this video a like if you're enjoying it. Make sure you're subscribed to the RotoWire YouTube channel. Just click the little subscribe button right there. That way you won't miss any of our content through the rest of the NFL season. On to the wide receiver position, where we start with Quentin Johnson of the LA Chargers. 21% rostered in ESPN leagues right now, coming off of easily the best game of his career, 4 for 118 and a touchdown on 5 targets. Volume is still iffy, hasn't had more than 6 targets in any game this season, but as we mentioned earlier, Chargers are starting to open things up a little bit more, starting to throw the ball more on a weekly basis. Got decent matchups against Tennessee, Cincy, and Baltimore coming up, although Tennessee is actually number 1 in the NFL in terms of fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. But we've seen both the Cincinnati and Baltimore defenses be leaky against the pass. I'm not sure I'm ready to fully trust Quentin Johnson. I don't know if this is a full rebound quite yet from his disastrous rookie year. It is worth noting, though, that he outsnapped and out-targeted Josh Palmer this past week. Would still rather have Palmer. Certainly would rather have Ladd McConkey in that passing game, but Johnston at least has to be mentioned after that big game against Cleveland. The New England Patriots, we're just taking this wide receiver core as a whole here, and the good news is that we at least had a top 3 this week that we can feel better about moving forward. It's always a week-to-week equation trying to decide where the targets are going to be doled out in New England. But Pop Douglas, Kendrick Bourne, Kayshon, Boutte, they were clearly the 1, 2, 3 this week against Tennessee. All 3 of those players were targeted at least 6 times by Drake Maye on Sunday. Douglas led the way with 7 catches on 9 targets. He's the guy I would lean toward right now. If I had to pick one out of that group, he's had 4 games this season with double-digit fantasy points. The bar is very, very low in New England, but he's the one who clears it most often. And keep in mind, Jalen Polk basically out of the mix at this point. You know, had some intrigue with him coming out of Washington, but barely saw the field in the Tennessee game, played less than 10 snaps. Looking at the San Francisco 49ers, I think both Ricky Pearsall and Jauan Jennings have to be mentioned. Niners coming out of a bye, could get CMC back this week, hoping to hit the gas after a rocky start to the season. Debo, Jennings should both be healthy as well. Jennings does not qualify as sneaky by any means, but just double check to see if he's out there. He's rostered in about 50% of ESPN leagues, maybe a little bit more than that, but there's a decent chance he could be out there. Ricky Pearsall, much more widely available. Saw him contribute in the last 2 games against KC and Dallas amid all the injuries. Not sky-high upside here by any means, but the Niners did invest a first-round pick in him. The Niners offense is still top 3 in the NFL this season in yards per play. CMC should only make that a more dangerous offense going forward. So Pearsall's worth a look if you end up in bye week jail, if you pick up some injuries, or a combination of those two. A few more receivers to get to. Looking at the Carolina Panthers now, Xavier Leggette, Jalen Coker, David Moore. Moore actually led Carolina in snaps at receiver this past week. I'm not overly interested in him. I would set him aside for now. I think Leggette is by far the most interesting of this group. He's still widely available in standard leagues, has 4 touchdowns in his last 6 games. The volume has not been overwhelming. The yardage numbers aren't crazy by any means, but he could essentially be the number 1 in Carolina the rest of the way with Deontay Johnson now in Baltimore. You look at the upcoming next 3 games or next 3 weeks for Carolina, the Giants, they got a bye, and they got the Chiefs. Not ideal, but they do get some better matchups later in the season. I know it's the Panthers. I know it's Bryce Young. But the number 1 receiver on just about any team should be rostered in most fantasy leagues. And then in terms of Jalen Coker, the rookie out of Holy Cross, had a touchdown last week, played only 24 snaps in the win over New Orleans in week 9, was targeted 3 times, caught 2 of those for 36 yards. Over the last 2 games combined, those 6 catches for 114 and a touchdown on 9 targets. So not someone that necessarily needs to be rostered, but a name to at least keep on the radar going forward as we learn more about this Panthers receiving core post Deontay Johnson. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine of the Tennessee Titans, his roster rate still under 1% in ESPN leagues. He has clearly benefited from the DeAndre Hopkins trade. Obviously, we've seen Calvin Ridley put up much better numbers the last couple of weeks as well, but Westbrook-Ikhine is available everywhere right now. He drew 10 targets over the last 2 games, caught 7 of them for 89 yards and 2 touchdowns. He actually has a touchdown in 4 straight games heading into week 10. Tennessee's going to be playing from behind most weeks. We got to be honest there. They have a tough schedule coming up. They're going to have to throw in most of those games. It's not sexy. You're not going to feel good about it. You're not going to be texting your friends saying, look who I got on the waiver wire. But if you need a receiver, just take a look. Take a look at Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. A few more quick hits at receiver. We'll run through these very quickly. Keep in mind some injury situations coming out of week 9. If Drake London misses time, I would look at Ray McLoud in Atlanta. If CeeDee Lamb misses time, I would look at Jalen Tolbert, certainly in Dallas. That could also apply to Jalen Brooks as well. Dallas will be without Dak Prescott for at least a couple of weeks. So Cooper Rush going to step in, a little bit lower upside in that passing game, but still going to be a team that's going to throw a ton because they're playing from behind and they can't run the ball. So look at those two guys. And then in New Orleans, if Chris Olave misses time, which to me seems likely, I mean, ended up in the hospital on Sunday. We wish him well, but Mason Tipton, Cedric Wilson would be the guys to look at in New Orleans, again, if Olave ends up missing a week or more. We'll finish out with some tight ends. Mike Gesicki, got to start there this week. 6 targets, 5 catches, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns against the Las Vegas Raiders. Since he's never been a team that prioritizes tight ends, it's been forever since the Bengals have had a top 10 fantasy tight end. But Gesicki, he's making a case over the second half here. Eric All, their rookie, would look pretty good. He tore his ACL on Sunday. That means we're going to see more of Gesicki going forward. Still not playing a crazy amount of snaps. They like to use Tanner Hudson in more blocking situations, but Joe Burrow is starting to look Mike Gesicki's way, especially with T. Higgins out these last couple of weeks. Over the last 2 games, Gesicki has 12 catches on 14 targets for 173 yards and 2 touchdowns. Bengals play the Ravens this week. Very tough game in real life, but no team has allowed more receiving yards to the tight end position this season than the Baltimore Ravens. And then real quickly, 2 more names to keep an eye on the way out. Jatavian Sanders in Carolina. He's been the guy at tight end with Tommy Tremble dealing with the back injury. Unclear when Tremble will be back, but Sanders playing a ton of snaps, saw 45 of 53 snaps on Sunday at a new career high with 87 receiving yards on 4 catches. And then Jonnu Smith in Miami continues to have a role in this offense with Tua back, played 42 of 61 snaps this week against Buffalo, 27 targets over the last 4 games for Jonnu Smith. He's had at least 6 in each of those games. Still not giving you a sky-high ceiling, but there is a reasonable baseline here in this offense. Just a name to keep an eye on. Some good matchups coming up the next few weeks for Miami. The Rams, the Raiders, and the Patriots over the next 3 weeks. Okay, that'll do it for our sneaky ads to make ahead of Week 10 of the fantasy football season. Getting down to the nitty-gritty. Let us know in the comments who you're adding, who you're dropping, which players we should be keeping an eye on this week. Make sure you're subscribed, again, to the RotoWire YouTube channel. Just hit that subscribe button right there. And go check out rotowire.com/try. That'll get you free access to everything on our site, rotowire.com/try.